And the CBN Act is up for tinkering. Well, in February last year, the IMF called for a review of the CBN Act, CBN 2007 Act, to strengthen the bank's autonomy and governance. That came around the time the Supreme Court made an order to suspend the ban on the old 1,500 and 200 naira notes, of course. Many then questioned the right of the court and the independence of the CBN. Now there is a proposed review of the CBN Act by the National Assembly. Many are raising concerns about it. They warn that the amendments could undermine the operational independence and flexibility of the CBN, which is crucial for achieving its price stability mandate. There are those on the other side of the divide who argue that the CBN's independence was not the problem, but the self-determined expansion of the scope of its mandate that seemed to undermine the roles of fiscal authority and created a matrix of conflicting institutional actions. Let's have a conversation around this morning. We have Ahmed Meyaki, who is a public affairs analyst. He joins us virtually this morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Good one, everyone watching us from all parts of the world.
Yeah. Ogo Okiti joins us as well. He is Chief Executive Officer, Think Business Africa.
Yeah, good morning to you. I'm glad to be here at Sunrise.
Thank you so much. As well as Ugodre Obichukwu, who is a financial analyst and also CEO Nairametrics. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Meyaki, let me begin with you. Would you say there is much ado about nothing when we talk about this CBN Act review, or it's, as some may assume, another attempt of some foreign organization to influence Nigeria's laws and operations?
Well, good morning. It's with mixed concerns. While it is okay for agencies like the IMF and, of course, the National Assembly, reviewing the acts establishing the CBN, that seems to everyone globally that an attempt to strengthen the bank, is a way of ensuring that CBN, the culture of compliance and strengthening the corporate governance, as well as ensuring that the bank improve in its services in line with the mandate of the bank. It's okay, but particularly you mentioned in the opening the need to ensure the autonomy of this bank. Certain provisions of the amendment is okay, but then there are certain parts that seeks to, affect the autonomy of the central bank, which of course will affect not only the operational autonomy of the bank against international practice, but it also, seeks to strengthen that issue of stability, because the whole essence is to ensure that we have a medium and short-term perspective that ensures that we have an effective monetary policy, which is a global practice. But the provision of the amendment, assuming the National Assembly had gone with its public hearing, certain provisions, I think there are about 24 different sections of the Act, of the 2007 CBN Act that seeks to be amended, and that seeks to threaten the independence of a CBN as an apex bank, and that will also affect its mandate. There are certain provisions that talks about the tenure of the governor and the deputy governors. Certain provisions that also seeks to establish coordinating committee for the monetary and fiscal policy of the bank, which certainly will affect the operations of the bank, because we are bringing in fiscal authority to dominate this committee, and as well as affect the operations, as well as the operational autonomy of the bank in monetary authority. This is completely in variance with international best practice. Most banks in the world, we seek to emulate certain banks like the America. They have the Federal Reserve, which serve as the central bank of the United States of America. That seeks to operate an independent as an independent operations. They call it independent within government. The CBN of any country seeks to operate independent of government so that it operates with that independence to be able to set up policies, that are completely in line with international best practice. This is the same with what you see in the Bank of England, in the UK, as well as Bank of Canada. A lot of countries in the world that we want to emulate their system, allow the central bank or the uppermost bank of the countries, to operate independent of fiscal authority.
Okay.
There are, like I've said,
all right, Mr. Mayaki,
certain provisions that is in conflict.
Mr. Mayaki, may we just bring the others into the conversation, please? Thank you very much. Mr. Okiti, do you think that the CBN Act of 2007, do you think it requires any amendment? And if you do you think it requires so many amendments? Because Mr. Mayaki has just told us that that there are about 24 being proposed.
Thank you so much for that question. I think the first thing is to say law is very dynamic. So I do not have the role of the National Assembly is to make laws. So if they actually think fit that the Act of 2007 do require some amendments, so be it. So I don't have any problem with that. I think where I think the problem is in relation to the process. So if you observe very, very carefully in the last 1 year since this National Assembly came into place, some of the laws and some of the changes that they have been seeking to make seem to come like a thief in the middle of the night. So whether you look at the cybersecurity and some other things. So for me, our law should be dynamic, the legal changes should be dynamic, and it is the right of the National Assembly to review them. However, the process must be very, very clear. There should be transparency, and the public should be involved as much as possible. So I'm glad that we are having this conversation. So now to your question directly, in terms of the 2007, I think it is the imperative of the National Assembly to state the objectives for which they are reviewing that law. So if you look at the law since 2007, we had Soludo under that law, we had Lamido Sanusi under that law, we had Governor Emefiele under that law. So we've had 3 governors. So what are the gaps that they have seen in that law? One, from what I have read that came out, one of the ones that I think they've seen that, okay, maybe the nature of the 2 terms, that's 2 terms, the governor potentially having 2 terms means that they are overly political or trying to please the president, so not as independent as it was meant to be in the law. That's number 1. Number 2, from what I have seen, I think they probably think that the notion of a central bank independence should not so much involve that of interest rates. So they want some powers around that measure. That's number 2. Number 3, I think there's the area of compliance. So I'm drawing their conclusions from the law from the amendments I've seen. The third one, I think, is in the area of compliance. So if you look at those 3 major areas, are there some changes that need to be made? Yes. However, we have to be very, very careful. So why should we be careful? I think Mayeka said that very well. We have to be careful that when we make changes to the law, it does not really affect the independence of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And especially when it comes to monetary policy, instruments and elements, that is very, very critical. Because when we talk about interest rate setting and interest rate changes, it is not just that the central bank makes those changes. It is that the market, the investors must actually see that there is no political influence at all. So it's not sufficient for us to just see a committee just making those changes. So when you have the law, the amendments that I saw, that I have seen, that they want to set up a kind of monetary and fiscal policy, there is nothing wrong with that body per se. You can have an informal setup, which I think already exists. So I think it should not be formalized, because when such structures become formalized, then it gives the impression that there are fiscal overbearance on the operations of monetary policy. And I think that is the most critical element of the amendments that I have a challenge with.
So is there a problem then with the independence? I'm taking that to you, Mr. Obichukwu. There are those who are questioning that independence, and then there are those who are saying don't interfere with it. Where do you sit, on that particular issue of independence of the CBN, particularly in the light of what happened when the CBN took that decision? Although, some would say, well, they took permission from the president. The independence now, in the light of what some consider the abuse of the Naira that saw to all the conversation that happened before the elections.
Thanks so much for the question, and interesting comments as well from the other guest. So first of all, I'm a free markets proponent, so definitely would back independence of the CBN. If you look through history, especially recent one, and you ask yourself which countries currently don't have independent central banks, you're looking at Argentina, Turkey, Iran, Russia. These are the sort of countries that we want to mirror our CBN, against. Definitely not. Let's also remember clearly that we have had several CBN governors over the last 2 to 3 decades. And that we had a CBN governor that overused his powers, like I insist, was just a pure anomaly. And that also happened because you had a president or a government that allowed that to happen. Let's remember that this was a government that ran as fiscal deficits for years and had huge shortage in revenue. And we also experienced different economic trajectory over the last 8 to 10 years. We saw oil prices dip. We had 2 recessions. We had COVID-19. We had the exchange rate crisis. And all through this period, you had very low government revenue. And so that gave the central bank unnecessary powers and allowed it to misuse the powers of development finance. So that exactly is the issue here. And so it's important for us to, separate the mistakes of the past and the learnings from it, and not try to throw away the baby and the bathwater. Now, let's not also throw away what they're trying to do. There are some important amendments that I've seen that they want to introduce that are quite commendable. For example, allowing women to be clearly stating that you need to have a woman as part of the board of directors of CBN. I think that is commendable. I think this section around trying to make sure that issuance of legal tender does not go through the same kind of crisis that we did last year, I think that is quite commendable. The area around recapitalization of banks, I think that is also quite commendable as well. They're trying to make sure that the central bank itself is recapitalized as it's trying to recapitalize other banks. However, what I do not agree with, and no one should ever agree with it, is allowing the central bank's core independence to be impinged on. You cannot have a committee of the central bank and maybe the Minister of Finance and having them have a coordinated monetary and fiscal policy to decide on interest rate. That should never happen. And there's a core reason why. Interest rate setting from a central bank's perspective would always be different from what fiscal authorities want to do. Fiscal authorities are oftentimes politicians, so they tend to have short to mid-term goals when it comes to setting fiscal policy, and sometimes it's politically motivated. Now, the reason why you insulate the central bank from all this is that the central bank has a different view of the economy. You need to have that independence because they look clearly at the long term. They look at inflation, they look at interest rate setting, they look at your exchange rate policy. So those things do not require any form of political interference. And I think that is that is sacrosanct. It is something that we must protect clearly, and those are the areas that I don't agree with. Another one as well was the one on budget. Why would you want the National Assembly to start to get involved in approving the budget of the central bank? We shouldn't even allow that to happen. In fact, that is just a cesspool of disaster, because then you start to have unnecessary debates about the central bank's budget. The central banks can't even function properly, and then you now have an entirely politicized central bank, worse than what we even had in the last 8 years or so. So those are my concerns, and like I stated earlier, very, very important that as a country that is looking to integrate itself globally, that continues to look for global financing, global funding, global investors, your central bank policy, the construct of the law governing your central bank, must be consistent with what you have in countries that you want to emulate. It's as clear as that. So that's why I started with, do you want to be like Iran? Do you want to be like Turkey? Do you want to be, do you want to be in the mode of countries that have economic practices? So that is my own take here. Thank you. Interesting
perspective, Mr. Obi-Chukwu. Mr. Mayaki, let me come back to you on this particular issue. I mean, one of the proposed amendments is also talking about a chief compliance officer in the rank of a deputy governor, which is expectedly answerable to the board and appear before relevant committees of the National Assembly. What's your take on that?
Well, that is a completely duplication of what we have in place right now. You cannot have, yes, it is okay, while it is okay to have a chief compliance officer within the bank that ensures the CBN operates within, provided laws. It is completely interfering in the operations of the bank, where you have chief compliance officer reporting outside the board. Yes, you can have anybody in the ranking of a deputy governor as chief compliance officer, but that is eroding on the autonomy of the bank. We keep, like the last speaker, Mr. Obi-Chukwu, mentioned, we cannot seek to want to emulate certain emerging economies of the world and operate completely at variance to those things we want to emulate. The chief compliance officer, in my opinion, is an attempt, yes, to strengthen the bank's compliance to best practices. But right now, aside that would be a duplication, because you have in the federal arrangement within and outside the bank, a mechanism that seeks to ensure that the bank operates within the provided laws and there are no excesses like we saw in the last 8 years. Yes, everything that is done should be done within that ambit of the law. But when you have so many checks, that will affect the process of the monetary policy and as well as the issue of inflation that is being currently managed within the short and long term by the management of the bank. So we should not cage the bank. We should not, do such things that seems to emasculate the operations of the bank, that erodes the authority of the bank to be able to take certain decisions. The National Assembly has oversight functions. The committee, the Banking and Other Financial Institutions Committee has the oversight functions, yes, to check the excesses of the bank. But this same arrangement was in place when we had the tenure of MFLA doing such things that seems to contravene the international best practice. So we're going to compound on the challenges. We're going to restrict and ensure that the operations of the banks are affected in ensuring stability for the monetary policy and, of course, for the economy. What we are seeing right now under the Cardoso-led leadership is something that deserves commendation because, like the previous speakers has mentioned, the issue of development financing, we have seen currently the CBN is deviating from that, is focusing on the monetary policy of the country because development financing is a direct distraction. We saw the last CBN going into security, going into agri, going into health, going into education, which is completely, a deviation from the monetary policy functions of the CBN. So we must see a CBN that functions very effectively, and it cannot function effectively when you have so many bottlenecks, like bringing in a chief compliance officer that reports to the board, rather than the leadership, because a CBN leadership must be seen to operate without any interference within or outside the operations of the bank. So we want to see that those other mechanisms that strengthen this process of ensuring compliance, without unnecessarily bringing in bottlenecks. Because in my opinion, the chief compliance officer will be a duplication of what we already have in the structures that manages the bank, and vis-a-vis the monetary policy functions of the bank, and then of course the stability both within the long and short-term plan, which is, that is the best practice that is being done all over the world. We cannot seek to want to emulate certain emerging economics, and then we want to have a different ball game for us. It doesn't work that way. In addition to this, they talked about also the tenure of the leadership of the bank. The CBN, the governor should serve for a single 6-year period. And that is also completely at variance with the international best practice. We keep talking about other economies. Bank of England, encourages that tenure of governors should last for 8 years. In fact, for America, the Federal Reserve, provides for a 14-year term, those staggered, but it allows you this longer period to be able to plan for your monetary policy, for the stability of your, of your inflation, as well as the economy. So we must be able to operate within this ambit that is promoted all over the world. And this directly or indirectly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayaki. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Obichukwu, let's talk about ways and means for a minute. It seemed like the expression just happened on our consciousness in the last dispensation under Godwin Emefiele. Is there provision for that in the Act? And if there is there any move now to change that? Because we saw how this ways and means thing was abused greatly.
Yes, of course, we all remember how ways and means was abused under the Buhari administration, of course, spearheaded by Emefiele himself. The law was very clear on the maximum amount that can be extended to the government. Let's remember that ways and means is essentially an overdraft to the government against immediate revenue. So it's not even a provision that is meant to, or a credit that is meant to be long-term. I think it was just 5% of prior year's revenue, maximum of that. However, what had happened was, because if you remember what I had mentioned, we had gone through several years of fiscal deficit where government was nowhere close to meeting its revenue. And so the only other place to turn to was the central bank. And if I remember famously, it was the former CBN governor, Sanusi, that brought this issue to the fore. And so what we've seen in the amendment that they are proposing is that I think they sort of mentioned it should not be more than 10% of cumulative 3 years revenue. Not really clear what that means, whether is it the total revenue for the last 3 years, of government budget? Is it actual amount collected or budgeted revenue? Because there's a huge difference between budgeted revenue and actual revenue that the government collects. And then not also very clear on who would be responsible if that provision is breached. Is it the CBN governor? Is it the governors of the CBN? Is it even the presidency itself, which typically have to be in cohort with the central bank for this to even happen? So that is the area that I'm not very clear on. But I do think that ways and means and needs to be addressed. The provisions, the aspect of the act that governs that covers the ways and means need to be addressed clearly. It needs to be clearer. It wasn't like there was anything that wrong with the previous provision. The difference was there was no punitive measure. So it wasn't a crime to contravene ways and means as it was construed in the CBN Act 2007. So if you actually want to make any amendment, that is probably what you need to go back and do and say, look, if you contravene this, then this is what would happen to ABCD. So rather than start to now say, 3 years government revenue or 4 years revenue, suggesting that you're even trying to expand the scope of ways and means itself. Ways and means, like I said, is just an overdraft, very short-term overdraft, not even meant to be owed beyond a year. Otherwise, you will not even be able to go back to the CBN to collect another one if you haven't paid the one before.
Okay, very interesting. You know, let me come back to you, Mr. Okiti. What is it that will be different? Okay, before that, let me talk about this. There are a number of loopholes that have been mentioned from time to time. There are appeals also for caution before I bring that on, again to you, Mr. Okiti, what are the most amends? What are the things in this law that you think must be amended? A little asked about the ways and means, and people didn't start hearing about it, even though it's, the response has been there. What are the things that must be amended? The ways and means thing, when people heard it, they were scandalized by the fact that such amount should happen like that. There are those who are saying, look, we don't want the independence of the CBN, eroded, but at the same time, there should be some kind of way in which we can ensure that the CBN governor stays on the straight and narrow path. What are the things that must be amended, in your opinion, and what are the things that must not be touched?
Okay, thank you again for those questions. So I actually think that Ugo has answered this question in a different way, so let me go direct now. The laws that we have from 2007, those laws were very, very clear in some respects. So let me mention two things that were wrong in the last 8 years, two things that went wrong in the last 8 years. Then let's apportion where the blame was. The first one, of course, was the ways and means that we said. Whose blame was that? Who do we blame? We blame the president and the governor of the central bank, not the law, because the law was very clear. So in that context, the law was not the problem. It was that the people that were supposed to actually hold on to the law, to ensure that the law that they passed was adhered to, was the National Assembly, and was not that. So that's number one. Number two, let me tell you also something that happened in the last 8 years, which is probably making us amend this law. The Central Bank of Nigeria did not release its audit report for 7 years. It did not release its audit report, but it is very, very clear in the law that the audited report should be released. So the National Assembly did not enforce that law. And because it did not enforce that law, we are in this mess that we are in today. So it's not so much about new amendments, it's that can we please just start implementing the laws that we already have? And I'm not suggesting that. I already said in my first time when I first spoke, the law should be very, very dynamic, yes. However, if we take so much time to amend this law, and we are not prepared to enforce those laws, we'll be having this conversation again in 10 years' time. So that is the point. We need to have ways in which we adhere to all our laws. So we pass laws all the time, whether he's in the fiscal arena, whether he's in the monetary policy arena, whether he's in the criminal arena, whatever laws, we just keep passing laws. However, every day people break those laws with impunity. So let me now answer some of your questions directly. In terms of what should be, there are some things that were wrong. Ways and Means was definitely one of them. I mean, Ways and Means. The reason Ways and Means was very, very critical, and of course, it's very, very bad, is because of its effect on macroeconomic instability and its effects on investment and its effects on uncertainty. So there should be no, leeway in the management of Ways and Means. Let me tell you the other side of Ways and Means, which makes it very, very difficult. The National Assembly, by further raising some complex around these Ways and means that we don't want to actually rein in our expenditure on the fiscal side. We don't want to deal with our expenditure on the fiscal side. We are looking for easy money. Easy money is printing money. But we don't need easy money. Let the fiscal side of the economy go and raise their resources and spend according to the resources that they have raised, such that the monetary policy instruments that we have can be effective. Because at the moment, it's not effective. The central bank is raising rates and raising rates and raising rates. However, inflation is just skyrocketing and the economy is getting worse. Why? Because the fiscal side has not been able to maintain any semblance of a balanced budget in the last 30 years. That is the problem.
We're costing home now, gentlemen, so I'll take 1 minute from each person. What kind of appeals, and I think that's where I would start, because it's something the CBN is already, talking about, and of course opinions are divided on it, but in the interest of Nigeria, not just the government, but the interest of Nigeria, gentlemen, what appeals should we be making to the legislators who will deliberate on this review? Let me begin with you, Mr. Mayaki. 1 minute.
Okay, quickly, our appeal to the National Assembly, particularly to the committee, is to focus on those areas that will strengthen the functions of the bank as a fiscal authority to ensure that we operate within the ambit of the law and then in line with international best practice. Our problem as a country is not essentially the problem of laws. We have so many laws, like Okiti rightly pointed out. We have so many laws. The issue is with the issue of complying with such laws.
Okay.
Let's ensure that we strengthen the bank to operate independent, autonomously, without any interference from the fiscal authority. Having the minister, for instance, the Minister of Finance chairing the committee for the fiscal issues. That is interfering. That is also compounding on the authority of the bank.
Okay.
Let's strengthen the bank. The committee or the National Assembly should do such things that strengthen the bank, like Section 20.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayeki. I think we need to convoke a national conference just for you to speak on this matter. Mr. Obichukwu, your 1 minute starts now.
All right. Thank you so much. Quickly, leave the CBN alone. Leave them alone. CBN needs to be independent. We don't need politicians, messing with the CBN.
I agree.
And then more importantly, the problem is not the law. It's the person, it's the individuals, it's the personalities. Starting from, the legislators. Let us make sure the right people are at the helm of the CBN or any political office for that matter, or any office for that matter. And then you will see the sort of changes that we want. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Okiti, you spoke the other time, so I'm giving you 20 seconds.
Well, thank you so much for that 20 seconds. Very, very generous. Let me repeat. Law should be very dynamic, and it is the prerogative of the National Assembly to change its laws. So I do not have a problem with that. However, I'm speaking for this particular amendment and for other amendment and for other laws. Let it be widely available before it becomes law. That is the process. Is very, very important. That's number one. And of course, number two, you can change the CBN law where it is necessary. But there is no point wasting time and energy making amendments if we know that the last 8 years, the problem of the last 8 years was not necessarily the absence of law, but the absence of appropriate measures to ensure that people have to the law. Thank you so very much.
Mr. Okiti, the next time I'll give you the loan of time. I'll put an interest on it. I have to thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Ugodre Obichukwu, financial analyst and CEO, Nairametrics. Thank you so much for your time. Ogo Okiti, Chief Executive Officer, Think Business Africa. Thank you. As well as Ahmed Mayaki, Public Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
Well, we're not leaving these money matters yet, but not just the way you think. Right after this break.